Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to CBS News. It is June 1st, 1975. I'm your host, Linda Cronkite. As of 32 hours ago, the North Vietnamese Army has captured Saigon, the capital of Vietnam, effectively ending what has now been nearly 20 years of conflict for the United States. With the gradual withdrawal of U.S. troops from the region, the North Vietnamese Army faced little resistance. Now, in case you've been living under a rock for the past 20 years, here's correspondent Martha Harris to fill you in.
Thank you, Linda. There has been fighting in Vietnam for a long time now, even before the United States became militarily involved in 1965. After fighting off French troops, Vietnam became an independent state but was divided into North and South Vietnam. North Vietnam was communist and was ruled by Ho Chi Minh, and the South was controlled by Ngo Dinh Diem and Emperor Bo Dai. This division caused future conflict because the United States moved to support the Diem regime. Containment was a necessary strategy used by the United States to stop the spread of communism. You see, if one nation becomes communist, there's a very good chance that the neighboring nations will also become communist, and this threatens the United States' security. So, we got involved to contain the spread of communism and maintain our security, but for those of you wondering what all the protests are about, here's some footage from an anti-Vietnam march held on November 15th, 1969, narrated by our correspondent Agnes Johnson.
As you all know, this has been the first war televised to the public, and what a show it's been, and certainly not in a good way. This particular protest was sparked after the failure of the Tet Offensive, an unfavorable turning point in the war that resulted in heavy casualties. This changed the course of the war by beginning a slow, painful removal of our troops from Vietnam.
The war protests Agnes just reported on began to die down when Lyndon B. Johnson decided not to run for re-election as a result of the unfavorable public opinion towards efforts in Vietnam. Nixon, our current president, was next. In an attempt to appease the public, he developed the strategy of Vietnamization, in which we would supply South Vietnam troops with training and supplies so that they could fight their own battles, and our troops could return home, just what the public wanted. Although he tried to help South Vietnam fight, there was a major change in Vietnam because they no longer had American troops to fight. They began to lose more battles. Let's see how they're faring in Vietnam now. Agnes Johnson is ready to report back to us. Agnes?
It's Agnes Johnson on the scene here in Saigon, which has just fallen to the North Vietnamese. I have to tell you, Martha, it's not looking great for the South Vietnamese here. Over 3 million people have been killed throughout the course of this war, and massive damage has been inflicted across this region. It is safe to say that Vietnam will need decades to recover from this chaos. Looking at the effects of Agent Orange alone, the environment and agriculture which the Vietnamese have relied on so heavily, even prior to the war, have been severely damaged. Some of the health effects of Agent Orange can be seen even now. We've seen a sharp rise in cancer rates, birth defects, skin disorders, and psychological problems across the region, which can be attributed to the widespread use of Agent Orange. Given these devastating effects, it's easy to see why both North and South Vietnam are eager for this war to end. However, it is difficult for both the Americans and the South Vietnamese to digest the results of this long-awaited end. It's almost certain that the reunified Vietnam will be a communist Vietnam. There will definitely be some major changes here in South Vietnam. What does this mean for the U.S., Linda?
20 years, $168 billion, 58,220 American lives lost, all to contain the spread of communism, all essentially for nothing. As Agnes said, the defeat of South Vietnamese troops at Saigon will most likely usher in a unified communist Vietnam. As Martha said, public opinion quickly turned against our efforts in Vietnam as a result of the Tet Offensive and the gruesome images broadcasted to the public. Now, a lack of confidence in the government permeates American society. Looking forward, international involvement may be limited by a reluctance to get involved in the affairs of other nations due to the consequences of this conflict. This result has significant implications regarding our relationship with the Soviet Union. The Vietnam War was essentially a proxy war between us and the Soviet Union. The humiliation faced in Vietnam has bolstered the confidence of the Russians and made it appear as if we are losing this Cold War. Looking forward, our approach to opposing communism must be altered in order to maintain our security. And that's the way it is.